This is
the
Bhangra Podcast.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of the Bhangra Podcast. Today I'm speaking with the judges of East Coast Showdown 2022. We mainly talked about the contentious conversation about overriding points during deliberations, which ended up putting UNC over Gator Bhangra. We also talked about the other placings and the other things that they thought were interesting from the night. Just a few notes before we get started. Howie wasn't able to make the recording, so unfortunately we won't be hearing from him today. If you're listening to this episode as it comes out, today is the last day to submit your bracket for Bhangra, the best performances of the decade. Starting tomorrow, February 25th, the actual voting will begin, so keep checking our IG page for ways to take part and let your opinion be heard. Alright, here's the show. Welcome, y'all, to another episode of the Bhangra Podcast. Today, I'm with the judging panel for ECS 2022.
I'm Naina. You probably know me from the Bhangra Podcast and also from the Berg panel. I have danced with a bunch of teams, most recently DDR.
Hi, everyone. I'm Avi Jaggi. I also had the privilege of judging at East Coast Showdown with Eric, Naina, Keshav, and Howie. My most prominent, I think, thing in Bhangra was starting VSB with my brothers. And other than that, I was on JMU Bhangra for a little bit, started a guys team, and then that led to Virginia School of Bhangra. And since then, it's been a great joy ride.
My name is Eric. I've been dancing since I started at UVA in 2015. Was captain there 2019, and since then have danced for Capital Bhangra and Dunia Derang since like spring 2018 or so, and still dancing with DDR.
Hey guys, Keshav here. I started dancing almost 10 years ago at this point. I started dancing at Temple University on the team there. And then from there we went and I helped start BDS, and I also started Dashan in Philly. And I've been judging for a couple years now.
Yeah.
So far, Howie is not here, but Howie was our fifth judge, so hopefully Howie will jump on at some point.
All right. So, placing for ECS, first place went to UNC. Gator got second, and CMU got third.
The full lineup was Virginia Tech, Boiler Bhangra, UNC, CMU, First Class, Gator, and Maryland Bhangra from UMD.
Alrighty. So, first things first, go down the line. Who'd you have first, second, third? And then we could talk about like major conversations and things like that. Get it rolling.
Actually, I have the score sheets up. If you guys don't have any opposition, I'm gonna just go through and read who each of us had points wise for first, second, and third. I think that'd be interesting for everyone to hear.
I think that's a great idea.
Great. Okay, so Eric had Gator in first place, and it looks like second and third were a tie for points between CMU and First Class. Howie had first as Gator, second was UNC, and third was First Class. My own scores, I had Gator as first, UNC as second, CMU as third. Avi had UNC as first, Gator as second, and CMU as third as well. And Keshav had Gator as first, CMU as second, and UNC as third. Those are individual scores. Overall scores across all five judges, just points wise again. Gator was first, UNC was second, and CMU was third.
Cool. So, naturally, there was a little switcheroo.
There was a switcheroo.
So, talking about it, why was the switch between first and seconds, and why'd you override on points?
So I can probably bring up one of the bigger like surface level points. Big picture, you could probably see in the points breakdown that just from the points it's very, very close, like a couple points difference here and there. On the rubric, if I recall correctly, execution as a general category was weighted about like 50-ish points, whereas the set as an overarching concept was about 30 points. So from that standpoint, as a group, we collectively felt that UNC had a overall better execution and a better performance
Mhm.
than Gator, who potentially had a better set. So surface
Gotcha.
level, I think that was why the switch happened. If anyone wants to get deeper.
Basically, so the way that the deliberations worked, we basically did what I just did, which is read through all the scores. We opened it up for deliberations. Avi was the first one to speak up. He felt pretty strongly about the way that the points breakdown was.
Yeah, basically, I just refused to walk on stage. Everyone. Kidding. That's what
You've
happened.
definitely been
That's
waiting.
Actually,
You've been waiting to say
no,
that.
that's actually what happened to VSB at ECS.
Oh, shit, okay.
So one of the judges, the panel disagreed with one judge, and they refused to walk up. So I pulled that. No,
To be clear, this was a different ECS. That was
different
about-
ECS, different ECS. No, yeah. I think both Gator and UNC brought a great performance on stage, and basically when we went into deliberation, just okay, it's all subjective. We all know that. But for me, it seems like with the other judges, UNC was a close second or third, and Gator was a close first. For me, even if you look at my scoring, it was more spread out. I saw in that moment UNC being pretty significantly ahead of Gator, and there were pretty specific reasons for that. And I'm happy to
Mhm.
go down sort of my ballot
Please.
for Gator.
Absolutely.
But one of my big things in performance art, and not just Bhangra, but dance, any kind of like singing, is opening, middle, and end. Right, those three moments, and how you sort of build the dramatic arc, and have a climax and whatnot. And you can apply those same principles to Bhangra, and I tend to do that. So for me, the reason right off the bat Gator didn't get deserved first was right off the bat the messed up dead front and center, and it
Mhm.
was pretty heavy. It was a pretty big mess up, and it was front and center. And then you close the set with messing up the ending jumps. So right off the bat, we've got front end, big mistake, bottom end, big mistake. There were great moments in the sets overall. In Gator set, I personally loved it. I loved the speed of it. I loved the songs. I loved overall. There was like a great energy and uh, they packed a punch in their performance that I think a lot of the teams lacked overall. But there were definitely moments that were not without their flaws, other than the two mess ups that I brought up. Right, I did not personally like the Mirza on Ek Do Teen. It just felt out of place. It felt weird. It didn't feel like
Mhm.
the best idea. Overall,
Can you for somebody who doesn't speak Punjabi, Hindi, etc. Like
sure.
Ek Do Teen, what do you mean? Explain
Yes,
that.
yes, yes,
It's
yes,
like
yes,
a
yes, yes.
it's like a retro Bollywood song. It was mixed. I
It
don't really
wasn't
know how to
mixed.
explain the mix because I don't.
I don't.
No, it was
wasn't
that was
bad.
that
It's
one.
kind of mixed. It was kind of mixed. You're
No,
right.
no,
The
no.
other-
That one was mixed.
You're
I
right.
thought it was not mixed.
right.
This one was mixed, but it was like a mashup. I can't remember what the song was, but it was like some pretty hardcore like trap song.
It was
and
very
it was just
hardcore.
like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
yeah,
just
it
watched
was
it again
like-
this morning, and I was like, oh man.
Sorry, I'm gonna let you finish, but
No, yeah.
just,
I'll
that's what's
just
happening
quickly go
with that
down. I know
segment.
I'm
Yeah, go.
drawing on. But overall, since we're talking about songs as well, I really didn't like Pehle Lalkare Naal Main Dar Gayi. That's like if you are Punjabi, if you do understand, like that's generally not a song like I would play in front of my mom, right? It's pretty sexually explicit. It's pretty like it's all an innuendo. And I would expect the Gator guys seem to know Punjabi pretty well, so. And the lexicon of Punjabi music is how I phrased it. Like you can find songs that are impactful, that aren't inappropriate. Loved that they had a Sialkoti. I thought the Brave Dil No Luddi segment was great. But then in the Pink Jordy, the energy one was clearly like killing it, and the other person, looked a little bit weaker. So the dancing, sort of the distinctions came through as the set progressed. But yeah, those key reasons for me, it just didn't feel good for me to give them first place. Um, when UNC, in my opinion, brought a complete performance. And yeah, maybe their segments weren't as nice as Gators were, but they did bring a complete performance. And for that, I felt like I had to make a case for it at least. And the judges seemed to agree. I really didn't. I told the judges, right? I was like, I'm the only one who has UNC first, and I'll explain my reasons. If you guys disagree, I'm happy to give Gator, because I'd get Gator second. You know what I mean? But yeah, so that was more or less the discussion from there.
When you say and before I hop on to everybody else, just to elaborate on what you were talking about, when you say complete performance, what exactly do you mean?
Complete in the sense that largely, I mean, Rubric also had dancing as a big, I believe the breakdown was 50-30 or so.
Was it an 80-point rubric or was
No,
it?
no, there's the 20
I've-
points for like things like impact and cohesion.
Got you.
yeah,
Got you. Okay.
memorability, team unity,
Mhm.
whatever ambiguous term you want to put it on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like UNC they hid their mistakes well, because I did go back and I watched the whole comp all night. It was a long night. But UNC, I noticed the mistakes that I noticed watching it the second time around, I did not
Mhm.
pick up on the first time around. For example,
Gotcha.
they hid their Jordy pretty well.
Mhm.
And the guy had a lot of offbeat stuff, but they hit it well. And I mean that's you got to work with the dancers you're given. And I mean I have a whole ballot on UNC, but I'm gonna let the other judges talk over
Yeah.
why I thought UNC was just better. But that's why I had Gators second though.
Got you. Okay.
So just for what it's worth, I think my point deficit was probably pretty like next closest to being 0 between Gator and between Gator and UNC. Like so when Avi brought up all these things about like here's why he thinks that UNC should win. For my side, I had no problem because my point deficit was so close, and like Gage just said right off the bat just now when we were talking, I looked at the rubric and I was like, I feel like UNC should win on this rubric, and based on how I've scored it. I was just watching UNC's performance right before this call, actually. UNC just looked really good, man, like top to bottom in terms of their dancers. And I think that, like, I mean, Gator, to be clear, had phenomenal dancers. We gave Best Guy Dancer of the Night to their red dancer, Adil, but like, there were other dancers on Gator that were also in contention for, Best Jordy, best guy, best girl. Like, they had a lot of strong dancers, but UNC had like a really well-rounded roster. It wasn't just like one or two really strong dancers at the top. Like, they had a good like 4 or 5 really solid dancers at the top. And like Avi was saying, like they hid their bottom dancers well, but I also would argue that their bottom dancers were like not really that far behind. I think they really danced as a team really well. And they just had also like they did a really good job of also rotating their dancers. Like every dancer had a moment at the front that they really sold, which actually was a problem we saw in other teams the night who didn't place. Like there were teams that got everyone to the front, but not everyone at the front actually killed their moments. But UNC had so many like really cool concepts, like as a whole segment. Like maybe like the one hit was like not as compelling as maybe one of Gator's, but like, their sub segment on the whole had like, it was a 16 counts worth of like really creatively like well thought out formations and moves and stuff working together. So it was really cool, I think, especially to see. I know UNC's been successful for a while, but like that particular team is still pretty young from what we were told. And it was really cool to see a lot of first-time dancers, a lot of first-time captains work really well within the UNC kind of ecosystem to come up with like a really creative and well-executed set with, working with the dancers that they've got.
No. Just a quick point. I think UNC, you could really tell that they put in the time at practice to work together. And when you clean up certain things, when you match as a team, it comes across. I'm not saying that other teams didn't spend the time. I'm sure they did. But I think UNC spent a good amount of time. I mean, I'm just guessing, but nitpicking and fine tuning a lot of their set. And it came across as a more polished performance than the other, even though the 80% of their team was like new, first time,
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is in
Yeah.
the judges meeting, they told us that 8 of their dancers, it was their first time, including one of the 2 captains who was their red guy. And that I think was pretty
That's sick.
surprising for all of us. Yeah, I think that I was probably the one that had the biggest spread between UNC and Gator. I had Gator in first, and I had UNC in fourth, technically, like 1 point behind the tied UNC and CMU. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and why I was, I guess, swayed. So yeah, I mean, for me, I think that I, in the moment, weighed more heavily some of the memorable, like whether different hits were memorable and stuff. There were a lot of points that I wrote down for each segment for Gator that there were things that I thought were really cool and made for a set that is really one of the only ones that I actually want to go back and watch again now. There were definitely down problems like Avi mentioned, but there were a bunch of moments and Naina has already mentioned a couple of them that I thought were really cool. One thing that I guess wasn't mentioned yet was they did at the end of their Sialko D / Damal sequence, they did this Gator these betkas with these Gator hands, and that was the only sort of thing I feel that we saw all night that had any kind of greater reference to team identity or anything like that. I thought that was very cool. And so yeah, there were a lot of really memorable moments. And I thought that Adil did a really good job selling a lot of the stuff that he was at the front for. But when it came down to it, I was relatively easily swayed to put UNC at top because I had a lot of positives written down for them too. They had the person who I was personally pulling for to be best girl, their blue girl. I just watching the video back now, I notice she really did a great job with her subchal at the beginning. And they had a bunch of memorable moments as well. Just like the others have said, not quite as memorable to me at least as as Gators were.
Yeah. So I was probably not as far spread out as Eric between the first and second, but I was also pretty confident on wanting Gator to win. But what I realized in the meeting was I was letting the audience member side of me kind of get in the way of it because I really loved watching Gator's performance. I watched them, I was like, hey, I was like, I'm having a fun time watching this, and I don't even think I wrote very much down because I was just watching the whole time. But yeah, but that's the difference between being a judge and being an audience member, right? When you're an audience member, you're watching, you're enjoying and everything, but there, fortunately or unfortunately from a judging perspective, there are some other things that need to be looked at. Which is why, oftentimes it can be very, very deceiving, to the audience, wait, that team won? But yeah, it was everything that everybody before me just said. All of those things made it pretty hard to argue against UNC winning. And sometimes that's what it comes to. Sometimes it's like a team's comp to lose rather than a team's comp to win. And maybe that was the case for Gator at this competition. Because I think potentially if the rubric was scored differently, even if it was flipped, we might be having a totally different conversation. But yeah, the points about the execution and the way that the moments hit and the dancer disparity were definitely strong enough to convince me to also sway my decision to UNC.
So, as maybe younger dancers and things I understand this conversation that we're having, but I'm hearing a lot of UNC did really well and UNC was awesome, but then why? Can you explain to somebody who maybe just doesn't have the rubric in front of them, why exactly if UNC was so good, why didn't UNC literally have more points for most of y'all?
So this is you're gonna get a slightly different answer probably from every single judge, not just on this panel,
And
but
that's fine. Yeah.
not even just on this panel, but judges in general. I think everyone has different systems for how they score, and that's a big part of it. So one thing that I think everyone needs to also understand is that, at least on the Bhangra circuit, I know it's not the case on other circuits, but like you can change your scores. And not only can you change your scores, if you're a good judge, you probably are changing your scores as you go because it's really hard to know, like, judging is relative, scoring is relative. So one team and one performance on one night in one lineup is one score. The same everything except like a different lineup would be a different score, or like a different rubric would be a different score. So it's not as objective as everyone thinks. And when I'm talking about like scores changing, I think this is where like your lineup, where you are in the lineup matters. Not matters in that like if you go first, you will lose, or if you go last, you will win, which I think is a big like myth on the circuit, right? It's why people like particular lineup spots. But just in that, like, if you're earlier in the night as a judge, I have like fewer things to compare you to. So, right. So if they're 10 points for something like, I don't know, formations, I'm just going to pick something out of the hat here, right? 10 points for formations, and you went second, and your formations were better than the team before you. Do I give you 9 points versus 7? Do I give you 10 points versus 2? Like, how do I know how much better you were than the other team? The later it is in the lineup, the easier it is for me to look back at the entire lineup and say, okay, well, team 1 was better than team 2. Team 3 was better than team 2, but not as good as team 4, et cetera, et cetera. So you're doing a whole bunch of like calculations for that for every single category, for every single team as you go. So, you know, little by little, then you look at a total score, and that's where you start to have these discrepancies, right? Where like everything may be like super, super close. I think the whole reason that like I had Gator UNC so close was because they were like, you know, first and second in this category, second and first in this category, first and second in the other category. And then you total them up and it's like, well, one team is ahead by like half a point, you know? So that's why deliberation, I think, is such an important part of the process, because it's really, really hard to accurately capture the experience of judging and scoring, and also just like receiving the art as it's being delivered to you real time. But I really think that like the process of scoring is inherently responsible for sometimes there being a discrepancy between like even what you as a judge feel is right and know is the right score, and then the numbers that you get in front of you.
I just
Eric,
wanted
did you
to,
wanna say
I
something?
resonated with a lot of what you just said there. And I thought that I wanted to just reiterate some of the things like, you know, you talked about the order mattering, and I just want to make sure that people listening at home, you know, don't take that the wrong way, right? Like you explained it well, but I'll say it again, right? Like the order doesn't matter in terms of your ability to place first or whatever, right? But it will affect the way that we are able to score. And it, as such, can then lead to, you know, a difference between what scores we might have going into deliberations versus after. The experience of judging is definitely way, way unlike just watching it in the audience and forming your own opinions. You only get to watch, you only get to watch it once, etc. And so, yeah.
I think would also say just like about that point about like the difference between like watching and judging. And this is something that we've now all said, I think, a few times, because it's something we also all heard from people after we were done scoring and judging, right, from this competition. When you will probably, if you ask judges, you'll hear this a lot, where they will say that like my favorite performance was team A, but I think the best performance was team B, right? Or like, I think that you'll have like people, I used to do this as a captain, where I would go up to a judge and be like, why didn't we place? And they were like, I thought you guys were phenomenal, but like either like 4 out of 5 judges didn't have you placing, or I thought you guys were phenomenal, but the rubric tonight wasn't in your favor. There's so many things that are variable, and it's not about what you like the most or what you're having the most fun watching. To what like Keshav was just saying a little while ago about Gator, it's not about what you like the most. It's like, what does the rubric say? What do the points say? What are the other teams doing? There's just so many things that are like part of that calculation.
Yeah, and I think one thing that reminds me of is like, especially with younger teams, I feel like college teams, you know, you develop your set and then you respond to feedback from judges, and you know, you do your best to make adjustments as the year goes on. But I think what really differentiates teams that perform particularly well is the ones who actually do look at the rubric and try to make it, you know, work for that rubric, right? And that's a really hard thing to do, especially in college when you like don't know what comps you're going to get into and different things like that, right? So That's always going to be a challenge, but I guess that means, working your best working your hardest to get a really good audition video is always going to be in your favor. Cause the more you know about the comps you think you're going to go to, the better you can prepare a set for those comps.
Avi, Keshav, I just want to give you all a chance to chime in if you all want to.
I had UNC first in my scoring Gator section.
Okay,
I got my way. I kind of got my way. But no, agreed with everything. Agreed with everything. You have to let go of your personal biases in order to judge fairly, I think. Right there, I mean, there were so many things I didn't like about UNC as well, right? And if a Gator set like resonated with me, if you've ever seen a VSB Vada set, right, you can see why a Gator Bhangra set would resonate with someone like me more than a UNC Bhangra set would, right? But I'm not judging because I like my style, right, or my academy style, right? I got to judge based on the rubric that's given and based on the performance that were provided. And I mean, for me personally, dancing execution comes first and foremost. I mean, before your set, before the creative aspects, if your dancers can't dance your set to its complete capability, then you're already starting on such an unequal playing field. And that's more or less the discussion that we had in the deliberation, was that UNC had the better dancing as a whole, Gator may have had the better dancers, but you know what? One thing I've realized is when you have those power dancers, they can tend to make the mistakes of the non-power dancers stand out that much more. And at a subconscious level, I think that may have also been what happened with me, because for me, the memorability, the impact of Gator just it kind of fell flat. And at least in comparison to UNC. Again, I still had them second, and I would have been more than fine with them winning first place. But I had to let go of my personal biases to see the performance from as objective of a standard as I can.
Cool, Keshav.
That's another kind of one of those smaller factors that does go into play. And Umar, you were talking about why the point distinction. Why is, like, some places there's this team has execution from some judges, it doesn't. It's because of what what each individual is able to see, and that's also part of the flavor of each individual judge, right? Like, we each bring something different to the table. If you wanted 5 robots, it would be a completely different thing. I see something different. Eric sees something different. And that's kind of the beauty of judging the way that we do. And the point about changing scores, that's crucial here, that we're able to allowed to change our scores throughout, because if we weren't, then shorter would surely screw people over. Like, the first team would always get the worst score. So there's a lot of different things that go into it. Certainly one of the biggest things is the individual personality and the individual perspective of the judge itself.
Cool. I do want to make sure that we at least, based off of this, it seems like there wasn't too much of a conversation on third place with CMU versus FCB, kinda, but tell me.
I don't think that it was really that much of a conversation. We all pretty much agreed that CMU was better. For me, I had them tied with FCB in second personally. But ultimately, I did think that they were more impactful, even though relative to the first two teams, not as much, at least after deliberations. So for me, when it comes to CMU, I think that it's kind of a typical story. One thing that Howie was saying in the judges meeting was, he's judged CMU many times before, and this kind of fell in line with many of the criticisms that he's had in the past, which is, great dancing, like their execution, for me at least, the best sync of the night. Everybody at CMU dances the same, and that's really impressive. And if other teams could pull that off, then, we would be in for a totally different show. But at the end of the day, like, I remember very little from that set. There were a few good moments that I have written down in my notes, but at the end of the day, my overall thoughts were nothing particularly memorable aside from the fantastic execution. So there were also a couple of things that brought them down. Otherwise, I think that maybe they would have been vying for second. But in particular, they brought out the snare drum during their Kunde segment. We talked to the guy who was playing the drum in the judges meeting, and he told us like what beat he was trying to play, and we were like, yeah, that just didn't come across to us at all. It just sounded like you were banging on it. So
it's hard, and like this is one of those
Mhm.
where it's like it's a risk, right? But it's like it's hard to know until you're on that stage. Like, how does it sound in the audience? You don't know. How does it like? Are we gonna know what you're doing? Like, I give them a lot of props for taking that risk. Did the risk pay off? Not necessarily the way that they intended, but CMU tried some stuff. First Class tried more stuff, but like Eric said, I just pulled up the scores, by the way. Like, they were actually number one in dancing ability for the night. First Class had, I think, like third and fourth, and like I think set design and dancing ability, something like that. So CMU was number one in one of those categories. Kind of hard to
yeah, and I think that obviously a lot of people are going to or they see First Class getting fourth and they think, how on earth is that possible? They just got first at Berg, right? There's a few reasons why they didn't perform as well as they did at Berg. One of them was the lower dancer quality. I think Avi was in particularly upset about like maybe like a tall yellow jodi or something like that. Not getting down on his jognis and things like that. So that's one aspect. The second aspect, if you've seen the Berg set, a lot of it's the same, but there's also a lot of things that are different. And some of the things that are different were kind of across the board not as good. If you ask me, like their the magnet thing that they did with their Kunde person in the front and center, like it fell, and that along with the fact that they weren't all doing the same thing.
Listen, I don't understand. Like I had did on FCB for a very long time, and for some fucking reason, I don't personally there's a reason like when I was captain, I like tried to stay away from like magnets on vests because I was just like, no, something always stupid happens, we're gonna mess it up. I don't understand how it's like 7 years later, and like I think it was Kishan just like, boop. I was like, oh, come on.
Listen.
Like,
I mean, to these guys' credit, so
I just don't understand
no.
how
So
we
we
still have not
specifically
figured out
talked.
the magnet vests.
We have talked. I personally have talked to these guys, exact First Class captains, about the magnet thing, because I said this to them at Berg, where I was like, guys, I was at the first Berg when the magnets were brought out, so it's been around for a while. I get it in that, like, when it pays off big. Like, the first time that these guys hit the magnet thing in 2014 at Berg, it was the coolest thing. Like, the entire, all of Social Sales was on their feet. The problem is that, or not problem, but basically the trade-off that these guys have to make this calculation, which is like, if we're going to keep doing the magnet thing because it's now First Class's signature thing, you're totally allowed to keep doing it, but you need to do it in a way that is totally new, which is really hard to do because it's been around for a long time now. And two, these harder things that are newer are then also inherently riskier. So if they pay off, they'd better be really good. So you have to take the bigger risk for it to pay off more. The bigger risk, I wouldn't say that it was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen at Berg, but it worked at least. The problem was that it didn't work here. And then it's not worth it. All of a sudden, that really big risk that doesn't pay off, it's just, you hardly get any points for it at that point. Not that you're getting a point per gimmick or something like that, but like, there's hardly any impact there. In fact, the bigger impact is like a negative impact because we're looking at like what went wrong as opposed to like what the cool setup is that you did. On top of that, again, like Keshav said, we're not robots. We've been on the circuit. We've seen the magnet thing before. We know what the setup looks like. So I don't want to harp on it because I respect these guys as like, it's in some ways it cuts both ways, right? In some ways it's a risk that didn't pay off. On the other side, it's their commitment to like trying to incorporate what they see as like some of FCB's set design, identity. Sometimes it works, sometimes
I just
it
want
doesn't.
it to work, man.
I know,
I just
but that's
want it to
like,
work.
it's hard to come up with shit that's so simple that it still works that like
Sure.
we're also going to be like, wow.
So it sounds like the size of the magnet matters. Is what we're saying?
Yeah. I guess so, man.
Another thing that I noticed towards the beginning is that they weren't using the space in the best way. It's like a bigger stage, and it seems like it was kind of empty at some points. They did go after CMU. To
Mhm.
be fair, CMU had 16 people, so there's a possibility that we were comparing them there.
Before I keep going, was there anything that y'all wanted to like bring up, or like anything you wanted to mention, any of the moments that you wanted to shout out? I don't know, any trends you
Yeah,
wanted
can
to
I
like.
just I don't know.
Yeah,
I
go
think
for it.
we all realize this. I don't know why every team at ECS decided to use "Schedule" as the song in their mix. But yeah, it's one thing when like a song is kind of sort of, if you're not like if you're not a native Punjabi speaker, you don't have access to someone who can easily kind of tell you these sort of things. It's one thing for us for some of those songs where it's a little bit more subliminal. But with a song like "Schedule,"
Mhm.
like the song is a glorified drink menu. So there's really not there really isn't like an excuse to use a song like that that's so explicitly alcoholic in its nature.
Mhm.
Right.
Reminds me of a trend that I feel like I've noticed, which is that when superlatives
Yeah.
are given, it feels like a lot of the time the team that gets best mix is the team that ends up winning. I've noticed that a number of times recently, actually.
Said, I agree. A good mix makes all the difference. If you already have a judge that's already jamming to like the music, it's easier to sell your ideas, in my opinion. Because you already have my ears. You know what I mean? Um, but in terms of trend, yeah, I will say I think I think I saw a lot of top dancers on a roster. Like I felt like the captains of teams um, made a lot of mistakes. Like I feel like as captains, as if you give yourself the red Geordie, which essentially means you're giving yourself more center time, right? You're more visibility. You have more of an onus. And I felt like from top to bottom, I mean, the top Geordies within teams looked like they were getting out danced by their the other dancers, which is fine, but then bring those dancers to the front more. And we're not going to do that either. um and so in terms of music, yeah, I wholeheartely agree with Geshav. Mixes were disappointing. I was really I mean, you haven't had a
Mhm.
comp in like 3 years. You've got this in a like whole repertoire of songs that have not been used over the last 3 years. Brand new songs that just came and went and no one, used. And I was really like, I talked to Angad, my brother, and I was like, yo, I'm excited to see what songs that like we've been listening to for the last 3 years, what teams are gonna pick up, and then they come with like ek do teen char panch chhe saat aath no das 11. Like they come out with khai ke pan banaras wala. Like they come out with pehle lalkare naal main dar gayi, right? They come out with yaar tera pinda hai
Uh,
daroos regularly. Like, come on, guy. Like, come on. Like, you know what I mean? At that point, like, just
yeah.
and it's okay. It's okay if you don't listen to Punjabi music, if you don't understand Punjabi, like right? Like you find boys like me to hang out with and like, like give you a little like, yeah, maybe not use that.
One more thing that I wanted to mention
right.
I
on the
think.
topic of just
Oh yeah,
things
go
that
for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
didn't want to
No.
go unsaid.
Go for it.
We haven't mentioned like Boiler, Virginia Tech, and Maryland really at all, right? And I wanted to say
I
that
was going to talk about that
for
too. Yeah,
me,
please
at
go for it.
least, I
Go for it.
didn't feel like, there was a huge drop off in this comp personally. I may think maybe others might feel differently, but I felt like everybody more or less deserved to be there. And like overall, all of the performances were still enjoyable to watch. That said, in terms of groupings of teams, I think it was like, we had 1 and 2 were together, and then 3 and 4 were kind of together, and 5. Yeah, 3, 4, and 5.
And 5.
Which 5 was
Yeah.
Boiler. And then 6 and 7 were a bit lower.
I do think I personally feel if Virginia Tech had gone later in the show, I think they would have placed better. I went back and I watched their set, and there were a lot of good moments. Now, I'm not saying they would have placed. I still don't think they would have placed. But I think they would have placed higher in their placings of not placing. Um, and I think they had a lot of good dancing. I think actually they had one of the best mixes of the night was Virginia Tech. I loved their mix personally. But like I told them, they were sloppy. There were, they had a hot, I think, Kunda segment, sub segment. But after that, in terms of ideas, it fell pretty drastically. But if they figure out that second half of their set and outside of props and get the dancing more consistent and less sloppy, I think they could have placed.
Mhm.
That's it. That's sorry.
Cool. Yes. So listen, COVID is a thing, and this is, one of the first spring comps this year post COVID, not post like the season literally like not happening, and then this comp has like a bunch of younger teams. Like even FCB is like right now a younger team. So tell me, I remember talking to Anil. I don't think we ended up like making a podcast on it, but he was like really annoyed at the Georgia comp in the fall. He was just like apparently like really mad at all the teams for stealing a bunch of choreo. I was like, yo, man, like, come on. So I don't know. Like, I mean, like, how do you think overall, like, it's like kind of like a new generation of dancers. How do you think they fared? How do you think they did? Like, that's like as a group.
I was honestly quite impressed. I think that overall quality across all of the categories in the rubric, there are certain teams that absolutely outshined everybody else. But I would say that, like, I think this comp in particular is such a great gauge of kind of what's happening on the circuit because all of these teams were young. If you want to know what's happening in the collegiate scene, like, look at ECS. And honestly, I think, I was going back through my notes today for what I wrote for each team, and so many, like, themes stuck out to me. Like, it's not... And it wasn't like any particular team is like really struggling. They're all just going through the creative process that every young captain and team goes through. And they are so clearly like on the path to figuring it out. And there's, I know that, Anil was saying that he was having a hard time seeing like real creativity at that comp that he judged. I really felt the opposite here. I almost felt like a note that I gave to more than one team was that you have too many ideas. You have so much creativity. And actually, the thing that would help you is to really pick your creative moments and build really impactful segments around those few moments, as opposed to putting everything in there. But that just goes to show like how many ideas these kids have. Like they're trying so many things. Some of them will stick for the next comp they go to, and some of them won't. But like that's such a great place to be in, to have so many ideas and so much potential. I think there's the growing pains of any young team. Of we talked already about teams having a lot of first-time captains, first-time dancers, first-time competitors. But I was honestly impressed. I'm judging Nashville next month, and like, it's been a lot harder to judge Nashville than it was to judge GCS because I think these teams are going to take this feedback, and I have really high hopes for these guys.
I agree with a lot of what Nana said. I think you're seeing more creativity overall. I think what surprised me more so than anything was seeing that ECS was front loaded with a lot of collegiate teams this year. Usually, I mean, we're competing, DCMP is competing, right? But you'll see like Gobru Glavberg come through. And I'm excited to see what blowout, we'll have in store for us. I will say, I think ECS was a little reminiscent of like, or it gave me flavors of the UK circuit. Like, if you've seen, like, I don't know, watch
Really?
some Bhangra show.
Why did you wait till just now to drop that incredibly hot take?
I'm just saying, like,
that is incorrect, sir.
I don't know.
Actually, I didn't watch any
like, I mean,
performances,
I
but I'm just
remember
like,
seeing.
This is the hottest take of the season.
Oh,
The
we'll do
season
hot
isn't
takes.
over.
I'll give you hot takes. We'll do a pod on hot takes. No, but in terms of the way that formations were working, and I don't know, I felt like flashes of seeing like these teams are watching the Bhangra Showdown.
I have noticed over the past like 2-3 years. Well, okay, like pre-COVID, like a year or two, and then like now, like formations have become more prominent and they have become a greater focus, which is fantastic because there was a solid like for 3 years where everybody's like, let me just make every variation on Jadoo Singha possible. And I was like, all right, we're done with this. Please stop. So yeah, it's nice.
Right,
and we're like
right.
focusing
That's
on
what I mean.
mechanisms
Mechanisms.
and,
We're
like,
seeing a lot more
visual,
mechanisms.
like,
I think
creativity.
CMU and Howie brought it up in the meeting. But CMU had this like nice little waterfall
Chummer.
effect in their in their chukmar, and it was like one of the hottest concepts of the night, I think. And I really liked it. And so like things like that, I was like, I didn't say
Yeah.
this to let the ECSW could.
Yeah.
But no, good. I'm excited to see what these teams turn into come blowout.
Yeah. I'll also say, since we haven't mentioned it
Oh, yeah.
a single time yet, is that there wasn't an audience, right? So that was one of the big impacts that COVID had on this. Yeah, you didn't even know exactly.
Oh, I had no
Oh,
idea.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
hell,
That's
okay.
like-
yeah,
okay, I
to be
know.
honest, we didn't find out that there wasn't going to be an audience until the day before we all traveled to Charlottesville. So that's fun.
I will say, all you teams that think that you're so good, you're at the top in all these top competitions, just know you are not the circuit trendsetters. You are not the ones who are going to decide how good the circuit looks in a couple years from now. It's these kids. They're practicing their skills now. They're practicing their dancing skills and their set design skills, and they look really fucking good. And just wait. Don't get lazy. Don't sleep on these young teams, these young dancers. Don't show up to comps and be a dick to them because they're young. They don't know what they're doing. These guys are part of our circuit, and they're killing it. They really are. So don't sleep on these younger collegiate teams. They're really stepping up.
Hell yeah. Get you want to say anything?
I would that, and then also teams, please stop high pitching your mixes. It's really annoying to listen to. It's like
It's
that's
so
Can you
bad.
explain what that
probably
means?
It's so
though?
bad.
when you listen to a song, right? When the producer makes a song, it's at a certain tone. But like my voice is at a certain tone right now. If I start talking like this, my voice just went way higher. That's what everybody's doing to their. I've been doing.
Oh, we are turning into
But,
the UK.
Yeah.
but you guys also, and you should definitely make this clear to teams, you guys also complained about the bass being too heavy, right?
Yes, here's the other thing. Oh my God, thank you, Eric. Yes. So stop high pitching your songs, teams. A. B. Teams, stop focusing so much on bass. We've been talking about not like bass, like bassiness. Stop focusing so much on bassiness. It doesn't actually matter as much as we think it's mattered for the past like 10 years. All that matters, 90%, is mids and trebles. So you mixers, you producers out there, when you pump up the bass in an auditorium, it just makes it suck for everybody listening. But when you pump up the trebles and the mids, you hear the vocals, you hear the musicality, you hear the.
We can actually
Hear
tell
the-
what songs you're dancing to.
Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Bhangra Podcast. If you like the podcast, the absolute best thing you can do to help us out is just to share the episode with a friend. The more people listen, the better. If you're listening to this episode as it comes out, today is the last day to submit your bracket for Bhangra, the best performances of the decade. Starting tomorrow, February 25th, the actual voting will begin, so keep checking our IG page for ways to take part and let your opinion be heard.